Welcome to The Constant, where the only constant is change, and we go for a swim in the deep blue of business, technology, and culture. I'm Dziebel. I'm here with my esteemed co-host, Juan Napoli.
Hi, gentlemen. How are you doing?
Good. How are you, Juan?
Excellent. Beautiful here.
Constant is anchored in 3 locations, Silicon Valley, New York, and Riyadh. It brings to you a global range of events, viewpoints, and experiences, something that you can hardly find in any other place in the podcast sphere. We draw heavily on a mix of sciences, from management to anthropology to computer science to linguistics, in order to penetrate deeper into what shapes, the current culture and the way innovation and technology are evolving to shape it and reshape it. We don't represent opinions of our employers, clients, or business partners, only our own. When we show third-party content, and only with explicit consent from the content owners, or we use the third-party websites, where the content is already freely available. So these are some of the guardrails for our podcast. So Juan, would you like to introduce, our guest today?
Oh, yeah, I will be delighted to. Thank you, German. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. This is amazing. Today we have Karl Lillrud with us. He's an entrepreneur, celebrity in the TEDx sphere. He has his own podcast as well, and we are blessed to have him here in The Constant. Thank you, Karl, for joining us from Sweden, right?
Thank
Are
you.
in Sweden at the
Thank you
moment?
for having me. Yeah, it's great to be in your show, but in such a amazing level of discussion that we're gonna have today.
Yeah, definitely.
So welcome, Karl. Great to have you.
Yeah, we actually had a very interesting episode so far. Thanks to German, we got a very interesting person, Victoria from Silicon Valley, and we've been talking about innovation and actually how Silicon Valley works, what is the uniqueness about it. We make some parallelisms with Riyadh and what's happening in the Middle East, and also in New York, where German is at the moment. And now through you, we can actually start to think about beyond the sphere in America.
Yeah.
What is happening in Europe? We hear a lot of things coming from Sweden for many years now, and this is an opportunity for us to hear from the horse mouth, what is really happening over there. I'm based in Riyadh, so I will be drawing on some parallelisms of what's happening in the region here in the Middle East. And I know you, Karl, you're also working in Dubai, in the UAE, exposed to what's happening here too. So it will be interesting to see, what do we cover in this podcast today. And we are preparing another episode where we're going to be talking about China as well. So this is kind of a unique moment for us in The Constant.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us a bit of a background in terms of, what was your journey to become an entrepreneur and an innovator, especially on artificial intelligence, and coming from Sweden all the way moving to Europe and the Middle East.
Yeah. So just to add a little bit more spice to the mix, let's go quite far back. When I was in kindergarten, it actually started to grow inside, like as all the kids. What do I want to become when I'm big? And for me, I have always been interested in innovation in one way or another. But at that age, I decided that I want to be an inventor of some sort. As I'm now bigger, older, more experienced, I would say that I managed to become just that, but not in the way that I thought it would be, because my idea as an inventor back then was someone that was making parts fit together to result in some sort of execution or result in one way or another. Today, it's so much more software based, and the problems are, we are able to build the capabilities from a software point of view, and we don't need machinery in the same way as we were thinking back in the 1980s. So I started my first company back in 1996, and the IT era was totally different back then. Everything was not as developed, if we say so, and there was other types of problems, but there was, just like now, tons of problems, tons of challenges, and with that, as an entrepreneur, tons of opportunities. And I managed to basically fine-tune my way of looking at the world as full of opportunities, where everyone else were looking at a world full of problems. Now, 29 years later, from tons of experience from around the world. I help companies to actually innovate. So circling back to my idea of what I wanted to become when I was a child in kindergarten, I'm doing what I believed in back then.
It's a powerful move.
Yeah.
You
It's
put
very
somebody
interesting
in the
because
dream.
yeah, some people say, that we grow, not if we successfully grow, it's not in order to learn something new, but in order to protect ourselves, from being corrupted by adult society.
Yeah.
So remember in The Catcher in the Rye, yeah, so he was trying to save kids from falling down the abyss into the problems, into the stereotypes, into everything. And instead, you've maintained that spirit of childhood that has taken you in the spirit of wonder, the spirit of innovation
Yeah.
that has taken you from your kindergarten days all the way to today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. Never accepting things for what they are, always looking at them from different angles. And that's where you see new opportunities opening up.
And Karl, what is, if you were to speak a little bit about yourself and your career, what were the key milestones that you would like to share with the audience that wants to learn more about who is Karl Lillrud? I know you've been an advisor and a consultant for large firms in Sweden and beyond. You're, working on building your own company right now. One of, the history of a series of companies that you have launched over the years. Maybe you can tell a little bit about you to the audience out there that
Yeah.
doesn't know maybe you by name.
Yeah. Yeah, because when I sit and talk to people, they ask me just that, who are you? What have you done? And I like to look at it as 3 or maybe 4, depending on how you look at it, different puzzle pieces. We have the entrepreneurial side, which is someone that want to build new things. And then we have the consultant puzzle piece, which is executing on all these different things that does not fit in the box. That's stuff that is not standard. And taking those experience into the consultant role, which is much more inside the box. You need to deliver to a client that have some sort of wish to transform what they have, which is very much the box, but they come from an organization that is quite held back by standards. And by having this ability to see opportunities where other people see obstacles, I managed to create something that is beyond what they see as a possibility. And with these 2 learnings or these 2 sets of experiences, I also realized that why would I hold this to myself when there's so many people out there that can find value in me sharing my experiences? So with that, I started to write books and I started to do mentoring and business coaching, as well as do public speaking at big events around the world. So I really enjoy how these puzzle pieces intertwine and overlap in one way or another to create the full picture of driving success in one way or another.
interesting, because in my experience with clients, a lot of clients, want to have what doesn't exist, meaning a proven innovation, because
Yep.
it's either innovation or it is something that we're all familiar with and we know it works. So they want to have the cake and eat it too very frequently. This always has told me, that there is also psychological transformation that needs to happen in executives together with a company transformation. There needs to be a psychological transformation happening. And maybe this psychological transformation needs going back to your personal story to go back and kind of reviving the spirit of childhood or maintaining it and fostering it where you really look for opportunities and not obstacles.
Yep.
And we look at the reason Juan is so keen on understanding your journey is because we're frequently looking at some of the luminaries of Silicon Valley or global commerce, Jensen Huang, obviously Steve Jobs in the past, so their individual story, because a lot of technology driven is so attached and linked and hitched, to individual executives, entrepreneurs, the founders of companies, startup founders, that it always stands to reason that there must be something about those individuals that has allowed them to innovate and maintain that spirit of innovation while at the same time putting things in practice to make that live in innovation that other people can partake over time. So the psychological aspect, or life story aspect is very important. We talked about it with Victoria Mensch, in one of our podcasts, who was identifying a secret sauce of Silicon Valley. Psychological transformation or psychological mindset is key very frequently to transformation in technology.
Yeah.
So would you agree with that, Karl?
Yeah, definitely. And if we look at these great minds that you mentioned, all of them have chosen their own path. They obviously always look for inspiration and look at what other people are doing, but they don't let themselves be guided by other people in that sense. They try to find their own stepping stones to create their own opportunity and success.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and Karl, you're part of the Harvard Business Review. You're an advisory of the council member. You're also advising on the World Economic Forum and the UAE Vision 2030. You studied in Harvard University, and you have been recognized many times as a global thinker, as an innovator, and you spoke at TEDx. So working with also with H&A Volvo as a consultant to top 500 Fortune 500 unique companies around the world. So what are the key things that you would like to share with us in terms of innovation? Let's start with Sweden. What is really happening in Sweden? Why we have seen so many interesting companies coming up from Sweden? What are the key names that maybe the audience will recognize but may not know are Swedish companies? And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the ecosystem over there.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, let's start with some companies that most people have heard about, like Volvo, Chanel, IKEA, Ericsson, ABB, and so on. There's a long list of extremely successful companies from a rather small country. I mean, a population of just under 11 million people. It's not that big population-wise, but if we look at innovation and we're focusing more on that, because from Sweden, if we today look at innovation, it's different from the companies I just mentioned, which are more of an industrial background. Today, when we talk about innovation, it comes down to different types of smart software companies, mostly SaaS products, and in other ways, technology based on software, like Spotify, Klarna, Lovable, which is a very fast growing startup company right now. And there are many, many more. But where, as you say, like where do these companies come from and what is the background that generate this type of success? It's many things, of course. But if we look at the drive behind them, I think it comes down very much to opportunity. But the opportunity is not what most people might think of it right now. Because in Sweden, it's rather cold and it's rather dark at least half of the year, meaning it's pitch black almost throughout the day in 6 months per year. And then in between that, there might be some snow, and the snow will be mixed with rain, and then the snow is black because of the cars and so on. Sorry to sound a little bit leaning towards the negative side here, but the opportunity in this is that as there's not so much other distraction and people might not want to go out and enjoy sun and walk around the town or hang around at the beach and so on, because that's not possible. We have so much more time that we can do other things on instead of actually being social, because it's more difficult to be social. So if we just take 1,000 people and put them into this situation, there will be a bunch of people that don't do anything. Mm-hmm. And then there will be a bunch of people that actually have the creative mindset, that seek something that might exercise their mind. And that's where entrepreneurship grows. So it's a very, very good breeding ground for entrepreneurship. Just if we look at the climate and everything around that. And then I know that we're going to touch a little bit on education and so on, but let's not rush into it.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting angle. Yeah, kind of climatic, geographical angle. But how would you explain the following phenomenon? Let's like zoom out of Sweden into Europe and look at Europe as a place where innovation happens, because we all live at times, when all the innovation is kind of being thought of as originating either in China or in the US. AI obviously is top of mind for everybody, and the amount of investment that's happening across, the two titans of global commerce. At the same time, what we hear about Europe very frequently is the amount of concern that European executives, academics voice around AI, that AI needs to be regulated, that there is a lot of hype around AI. So let's go down to the brass tacks. The AI as truly functioning right now is too far from conquering the world. Cannot even tell you how many R's are in the word strawberry. So it's Jan LeCun from Meta would say, that AI is dumber than your cat, because obviously cats can do a lot of things, that AI cannot possibly do.
Yeah.
So, and Jan LeCun, is originally from France, so he brings that critical perspective on things. So, what is your feeling, what Europe is like from the innovation standpoint, and where does it sit, vis-a-vis the United States and China in terms of driving innovation? Is it a completely different approach to innovation? Is it more kind of following in the coattails of innovation coming from the US? What's going on in Europe? How would you characterize this area?
I think that there are several different things that we need to touch on here. One thing is that the countries in Europe compared to US and China are tiny. So what happens with the younger sibling, or whatever you like to look at it, like the small person that have the spirit will fight even harder to reach the top. And maybe that is one piece of this, that we might feel like, yeah, but I can do that better. And then with the opportunities around me, I will make that into a success because I believe so strongly in my own ability to make something great. So on top of that, as you mentioned, also the regulatory frameworks and so on, Europe and many other countries in Europe have been working with regulatory frameworks for many, many years for the European Union to work in an efficient and smooth way from a financial point of view between the countries and so on. And we have standardized many things. I mean, there are tons of funny stories where a cucumber are not allowed to be sold if it's not straight enough and so on. Like there are come to a point where it's ridiculous. But then again, maybe there are some positive sides of that as well. Like if you pack the cucumbers in cartons, then it's easier if they're straight and so on. There's not as much air gap between. So, but still, what happens with all the cucumbers that are not straight? And then the entrepreneurs come into the picture again and like, yeah, I'll buy all these cucumbers that are not straight. Now I'll make something out of that.
By the way, like quick interjection. So in the US, there is a company that sells misfit vegetables. So you can order, misfit vegetables in the US.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Part of diversity, right? So you want to be conscious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be diverse with your veggies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exciting. So, Karl, when you think about innovation then in Sweden, do you think there is a concept of the triple helix where you have the government, academia, and industry working in tandem to drive innovation, and maybe a culture that allows for failure? And that's one of the key reasons why Sweden is so successful. Will that be one of the key factors that you will define for Sweden's success?
I would definitely say that yes, that exists, that they do try to influence innovation, if we say so, or empower influence even. I'm not so sure that approach is that successful, because if we look at the truly successful entrepreneurs, they are the ones that have gone against all the odds, more or less. Like if we look at Spotify is a great example where everybody said like, yeah, this is not aligned with how the industry is developing right now. And you're going to have such a struggle with a legal framework around that and everything. Still, Daniel Ek pushed forward and created an amazing product. And around this industry at the same time, companies just kept on trying and failed and failed and failed. So it's not something that just he came up with an idea and then there was an overnight success. Definitely not. And the same thing with Klarna, for example, where when they did their first pitch for an board of investors, basically, but it was more of a school pitch within the university that they were studying, the founders, they were told by this heavy panel of financial industry executives that this will never work, yet they have proven to be extremely successful in the financial industry. So yes, to your question, is this something that the society around have designed the success? Definitely not, but they are trying to show that it's one way to go about it and accepting that everybody are not the same. But then if we circle back to the education system is basically designed around making sure that everybody fits into the fixed puzzle pieces that the education system have designed, which is not around entrepreneurship.
Interesting. So education is not pushing for innovation, but still innovation is happening. So what is it? It's like this Viking historic DNA still persistent in the minds of people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a breakthrough attitude that I believe that I can do this better. And I will struggle until I prove myself right or wrong. And if I'm wrong, I won't give up. I would just pivot or take this as a development curve or just experience capital. Because, and this is something that I speak about a lot, there is nothing that goes under the word failure. Because failure, especially in Sweden, has a negative tone to it, but failure doesn't exist. The concept of failure does not exist because we have evolved, we have learned something, and that is knowledge capital, which is extremely valuable.
Yeah, one of the things that caught my eye the other day, I was doing some research around all the companies that are replacing humans with AI.
Yeah.
And one of the top examples that we have seen was Klarna. You were talking just about Klarna from Sweden, right? So, and they appear in the news because they were saying that they replaced 700 AI. But then recently there was a recent, reversal on this where actually they realized that AI was not doing so well and they had to rehire those that they fire. So interestingly enough, maybe that's, as you said, it's not seen as a failure, but as a trial. And potentially when AI gets better, they will be able to do it better in terms of, implementing AI and in the customer service arena, right? So interesting things.
Yeah, and also in this particular story, I think that there is a little bit of an angle to it, and I believe that the goal that Klarna had with this strategy was not to replace employees, but rather expand the workforce without having to hire even more people because they're scaling throughout many countries at the same time. So how can we have some sort of layered structure that maybe the first voice you talk to is an AI, the second one is an AI manager, and the third one is a human or something like that.
Interesting. So they are building a new business model.
Yeah. Always
It makes me
like
think,
investigate
that
what other opportunities there might be in how you can tackle the old problems.
Yeah.
it made me think, that there may be, two ways in which people interpret innovation and take the innovative path, kind of the right way and maybe the wrong way. I remember, the German Samwer brothers back in the 2010s, when they were build a clone of Airbnb. And for a while, it was very successful. But even the word clone indicates, that their approach, to innovation was a little bit from the point of view of safe perfection. Yeah, we already have a model back in the US. Let's just clone it, create an exact replica. And they were doing it, they were serial cloners in business. So they cloned, several companies. And you can make quite a bit of money off of that, as they did, But then, so Airbnb, instead of yielding to Wimdu, that was the name of the competitor, it actually decided to, in a very kind of blitzkrieg, type of way, colonize the German market and push Wimdu out of it. So Wimdu, was not prepared to that kind of aggressive takeover of the market and completely unconventional, out of the box thinking in that new territory. So what the examples of companies that you, Karl, gave from Sweden managed probably to stay kind of authentically innovative and take and make innovation part of a revolt against the structured world, in a sense, make it a truly a kind of a voice of individual genius that persistently applies the internal perception that he has toward business problems and persevering in those, versus an approach that, yeah, let me be innovative, but without changing my underlying.
Yeah.
So that when you end up creating clones of clones and you are trying to achieve perfection, although you're trying to kind of innovate, but in reality, you're simply trying to achieve perfection and not iteration. But iteration that includes failure as part of that is kind of controlled. Inoculate yourself against failure that can come to you from the outside. You control that failure.
Yeah.
Because Wimdup failed at the end of the day, not because it failed on its own volition, but because it was pushed out by a competitor, that it couldn't compete with. We include failure, into the iterative process of innovation, and we're not afraid to fail. Then we take control of that failing, the power to fail. It doesn't come to us, that is not forced upon us by our competitors, but it actually is harnessed by us for the sake of the same growth and innovation.
Yeah. And also, if we look at the concept of cloning startups, a clone will be a snapshot of a company's current position and their offer. They don't have the learning curve. They don't understand where they came from and how they succeeded. They do a snapshot and they don't understand the full width, and they will always be trying to following the leader that they made a clone of. Obviously, they will probably try to innovate and create an even better product, but as they don't come from the actual proper, let's call it struggle, they don't understand the full width of the problem that they're solving because they have not gone through the learning curve. So it's very difficult to jump into a market with a clone and prove that clone to be even more competitor than the original.
Right. Yeah. So we discussed this in a different context around the topic of the Soviet Union-U.S. competition during Cold War, when the Soviet Union tried to replicate Silicon Valley in the form of Zelenograd, which was an artificially constructed town outside of Moscow, where innovation was supposed to happen. At that time, semiconductors were heroes. And what happened is that, yes, exactly to your point, Karl, they took a snapshot of Silicon Valley, they replicated it. By the time they finished the replication, Silicon Valley has already changed.
Yeah.
The semiconductors changed. And to catch that spirit and really be part of the innovative flow, innovative mindset that involves, certain psychological predisposition, to your earlier point, Karl, is critical. And cloning, may take you, into the wrong territory, altogether.
Yeah. But what I would say, I mean, and we will discuss this deeply in the next episodes when we talk about China. But if you look at OpenAI and DeepSeek, cloning is not such a bad business, right? So things are able to be cloned and potentially at a lower cost. You don't have to face the same investment curve, and you need to do research with frontier models and hit all the wrong things until you get the mother lode right, and eventually you're able to implement something that is successful. If someone can then just copy that thing, that's you look at China, right? So China just succeeded by copying, bringing all the same manufacturer models, building even fake versions of many of the things that already exist, and they were very successful in that front, right? So I think that there is an element of business, copying the business model is maybe one thing, and understanding that maybe in your market you may have an advantage when you copy something because you will be able to adjust it to become something completely different that is better than the original thing, because now it's better, it has a better market fit, right, in your market. But as you said, if you want to make a clone and then compete with the original thing, maybe then that's when you're going to fail, because maybe in their market they are kings already and they have struggled in ways you may not be able to understand.
Yeah, which is also why many of these clone startups are not competing in the same market. They are trying to clone a product and move to and execute on a different market where the original doesn't exist.
Exactly.
But also, if we look at the example of OpenAI and DeepSeek, like we know now, and this is something that have been discussed at length already, and that is that DeepSeek used OpenAI and ChatGPT to train its model. And again, this is a little bit of like simplifying what they actually did. They definitely did do that, but they also created something that OpenAI didn't have. And that was to train their model on multiple core topics so that they had, like, look at it as personas or even individuals that are experts. So they had a platform of multiple experts rather than ChatGPT that had one platform with one expert at everything that had a hard time separating.
So they innovated
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
the existing
They
model.
created not a clone. They used the original to create something new.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, this
Right.
takes me back to my times in IBM when I have seen so many times that companies emerge from the big players. Like if you look back, one of the things that I was always mentioning to kind of the new people that we hired in the company is like, well, Microsoft, and it came from IBM. So basically, without IBM, there would not be Microsoft, right? Same. Oracle was just our database. The team that was building the databases just built Oracle because they have a new idea on how to actually innovate, and they were not able to see that level of innovation inside the company. Cisco was kind of emerging again from IBM's
Yeah.
networking that eventually was sold. So yeah, like to your point, it's not just new startups that are trying to get into the market and they get copied, but it's also the circle of innovation, as you said. As the company gets bigger, it's more about the business expansion rather than the business innovation,
Yeah.
and therefore the business innovation doesn't have a way to go out. Eventually, just is built into a separate company or into a different product in the market, and that's how the brain works. Eventually how the market works as well in terms of driving innovation and growth.
Yeah.
So it's exciting to see, what's happening in Sweden on identifying how companies in Sweden are able to identify so easily, gaps in the market and position themselves and grow so rapidly. There
Yeah.
should be a very, strong, innovation parks and capital and funding and entities that are looking at the latest startups coming from Sweden because of the trajectory of the market in the country itself, right? Is that the case?
Yeah,
Do you see
absolutely.
that?
Well, like the last 15 years, the VC market and angel market in Sweden have been skyrocketing. But if we go back like 25 years, we didn't have any such culture. It was friends and family that was the investors mostly. But as we started to see that we had so many entrepreneurs and that we could see some sort of stability in these executions or startups that were growing, then there started to come more money from outside of Sweden, but also like many of these successful entrepreneurs chose to reinvest their money in other startups in Sweden.
What are some of the startups, Karl, that you can highlight originated from Europe or Sweden that our audience, should know about, that they may not know yet? What are some of the highlights? What's something that you would say like, well, yeah, that represents currently the startup scenery in Europe?
Well, that's a difficult question that represent, because if I look at the startup market in Europe, it's many, extremely many small but very focused startups. So I think that, like, if we look at OpenAI just as an example again, they are a company that you sort of go to solve any type of problem, but in a conversational mode. But then they started to create images and so on and so on. We'll see as they grow. And what I see is that the entrepreneurs in Europe that are successful, they have managed to identify a gap in the market, this tiny thing where they find a solution and really will laser focus, target that thing to solve a problem. Because by understanding your exact customer, not the general public, it's so much easier to spend less money on your growth model because you know exactly who to target. But if you have a product that attracts everyone, it's going to be quite expensive to tell everyone that I have the problem for you, and then figure out what problem it is that they want to get solved.
So what are when you are in Sweden, right? And this is an innovation ecosystem already built, mature. So what are the differences between Sweden, let's say, in the US? Do you guys have Amazon, or do you have your own version? What are the key things that you will see in Sweden if you were there, if you're going to live in Sweden, that are different than other countries that you have visited?
So yes, we do have Amazon, but it's not Amazon.
Yeah.
It's
So
not that much.
no, it is Amazon today, but it's a company that Amazon bought that was called Tradera in Swedish. Yeah, and then we have most of the other stuff like Uber and so on and electrical scooters and everything that you see around the world. But you also have the smaller startup because again, it's not such a big population in Sweden. So if you want to create something, you have to have something that is impactful. So the startup world in Sweden is trying to figure out how to solve the specific problem, but making it financial viable for a quite small population. But then we find companies like Lovable, as I mentioned before, that have had a tremendous growth journey the last couple of months, and they managed to create a platform that makes it easier for anyone to be an entrepreneur. Basically, it's a chat GPT to build SaaS products.
So how a company like that emerges from Sweden, and how can they do they have the infrastructure, the servers, the compute capacity, the engineers, the software developers, and are they cheap? Because most other companies, when they want to build something like that, they will think of, okay, let's just get the software developers from India, so it's maybe cheaper, and build it in a way in which can scale. But it looks like in Sweden, it's all Swedish to the core.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we had something happening in Sweden many years ago. It was called the home PC movement. And it was something that anyone that had an employment, more or less, could buy a computer at extreme tax discount using their salary before it was taxated. So,
Like pre-tax.
yeah. And with this, we had quite powerful hardware in our homes at a very early stage. And on top of that, we started to build a really, really good network, internet connectivity in the major cities. So the country Sweden was very, very early on the ball, so to say. So we started quite early working with this type of technology, and it became a standard at an early stage. And nowadays, it's a standard for the rest of the world as well, but we have had it for so many years. So we take it for granted and we don't see the limits as many other people have had limitations in bandwidth and compute power and so on and so on. We have just looked at it from the different point of view and okay, so there's something I can build here. Let's build it. We didn't really look at it from the limitation point of view. We didn't see the problem again.
So you have a farm of servers hidden in the Nordics.
Yeah, we do have that as well. Yeah, for sure.
Well, where Santa Claus lives, right?
Enough capacity to solve all the problems of the world. Lovable is there to help.
Of course.
No, Karl, the way you describe Sweden reminds me of Silicon Valley as well, because Silicon Valley is kind of a country of its own within the US. Yeah. Very highly concentrated, impactful place. There's the fertile ground for innovation, and deep networks, available finance. So that probably are the ingredients of success. And maybe willy-nilly, Sweden not replicating Silicon Valley per se, but using the same ingredients of success, to do the same thing as Silicon Valley has been doing independently on its own. I have a kind of a tough question maybe, but it's been on my mind, for a while, and make open a can of worms, we'll try to open it, but then quickly close it. But it is for Europe right now, obviously, not everything are bright skies. So there are wars going on, the Ukraine-Russia war, so then, of course, the Middle East is close by with the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. A lot of things happening that are not part of the opportunity story, but it's still kind of going back into the obstacle story.
Yeah.
But how does Europe cope, the innovators in Europe, how do they cope with this situation? So what are any synergies or any true obstacles, that those geopolitical disasters are causing Europe? Any pain that really can be felt outside of Ukraine, Russia, Israel, and Palestine? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, again, maybe this is my way of looking at it. So let's take this with a pinch of salt. But from what I see, um, entrepreneurs see this as opportunities, because now you can build other types of drones to supply the armed forces with the other type of smart technology and so on. So it creates opportunities where there is a need, there's a gap, there's an opportunity. And as the need grows, because we see other type of strategic moves from Russia and so on in Europe, the government steps in and say, okay, so this is something that we are interested in. Maybe they don't say it out loud, but definitely they do increase the budgets to further develop the technology to protect these countries, definitely. So again, instead of looking at things as a problem, there are an attitude towards the problem in quite a large extent to actually create the things that solves the problem, because we don't have that many people again. But if we do huddle in and just get things going, we can create quite impactful solutions.
Yeah, it's interesting how wars historically have been catalysts for technological development.
Yeah.
And then whatever is invented for military purposes and applied in the battlefield later, after the wars are over, in a kind of repurposed for the consumer market.
Absolutely.
We saw that in the US with the aerodynamic body design. That was never happened to American cars in the 90s. They were all kind of cushy, like movie armchairs,
Yeah.
And then, after the war, all the aerodynamic design, that was obviously applied, to airplanes, got applied, to the cars, and we started seeing in American cars in the 1950s, 60s, that looked a little bit like airplanes.
Yeah.
And the aerodynamism, became part of design. It originated in the military. The same, with what the military industrial complex in the U.S. did with the semiconductors. They're getting a lot of early Silicon Valley developments because there was a market, available market for that innovation. Do we hearing you say we have exactly the same dynamic currently in Europe, right? When there is this so war, is a land of opportunity, for innovation, sadly or not, but it is, right?
Yeah. And also one thing that I saw in the war with Ukraine was also that Ukraine was very, very creative in how they use technology, but also they extended to going out and say, anyone can join our cyber defense force. I don't remember the name right now, but they're hacker groups basically. But there is no application to join. If you want to hack under our name and do good for us, then do it.
So it's like completely open source,
yeah,
right?
it's completely open source. As long as you do something good for us, you're welcome. And then of course there's probably something in the background that if you prove to be extremely good at what you do, then maybe you get upgraded or be working more in a maybe not controlled environment, but part of the organization that holds it together, more strategic structure and design around it. But in the beginning, it was really like, if you can hack a bank in Russia, then try it out. And some people managed to do that, and they hacked TV stations, and they hacked surveillance cameras and everything.
Interesting.
Drones completely transformed the warfare. Right. So it's the war right now doesn't look like it used to look, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, thanks to drones. And so that's pretty amazing. So again, Ukraine is becoming that side of military innovation and the front line, literally like the front line of innovation, in the military. And the US, is starting to buy, those drones now, because the war is never going to be the same. Sorry, Juan, I interrupted. Go ahead. Yeah.
To say, because I'm as an European citizen, and I lived in Europe for many years, 2 years in Bulgaria, 3 years in Slovakia. Especially I was in Slovakia, during the start of the war, and I was affected by the professionally. I had to move to a different country because they were closing some of the roles in Slovakia. But what I really like about Europe is the feeling that this is one place. Like there are no barriers, no customs, right? So you can take a car, you can go from Slovakia to, like we did with my family, we drove all the way to Switzerland. And it was like, there was no police controls. It was straight straight road, right?
Yeah.
And I think that feeling is transmitted into business as well. So it's all integrated. It's all kind of one place. So if, as Karl said, like if you have an idea, and it's good, it's a good idea, and anyone can jump in and help. And I have seen in many cases. I don't know how it's in Sweden specifically, but I have seen many times startups in Europe are composed for people from many nationalities.
Yeah.
Right. And even, people that maybe are first generation, born in that country, but their parents are from other places. So it's really a place where there is a lot of innovation because there are so many cultures coming together, races coming together, and languages as well. And it's all kind of, it's familiar territory for expansion. So maybe if you build a system in the US, you have an American mentality, right? And it's starting to move into other countries, you will feel like, well, you need to align to the culture, you understand, you need to learn the new language and the regulations. But in Europe, it feels like it doesn't matter, talking Portuguese, speaking in Portuguese or Spanish or French or German. It's kind of, common territory. You just, feel familiar and comfortable moving into different countries, different domains. Therefore, a company is built for expansion from the get-go, right? So potentially that's one of the key factors why companies in Europe are well positioned to expand globally. And also, obviously, Europe is seen as one of the strong, robust markets, the old world, if you will. A company coming from there in a highly regulated environment, it has already kind of that component of trust, right? When it comes into other markets, saying, well, this company is not going to sell my data, as a first thing to do. I can trust more a company coming from Sweden, even though maybe like in IKEA, right? You see all these funny and crazy names for tables and chairs and stuff, but it's kind of nice and interesting, right? It brings a cultural component to it, and it's just a breath of fresh air for the public and for the consumer. So potentially that's a key value add for companies coming from Sweden as well.
Yeah, it's a region without borders, even though there's some borders between the countries, but there is no border control. And if we go back, why they removed the borders was designed because we wanted to create more business opportunities, so that you could have a more free flowing move of physical objects between these markets.
And that translates as well in software and systems, networks, data, knowledge.
It affected the culture, not just the actual economical infrastructure, but actually our mindset. Like, we don't have that limit. We don't need to look at a country as a one-stop shop where you have to do everything within your borders. You can actually grow outside. And of course, with SaaS products and everything web-based and app-based now, we don't look at our product as built for one certain market if it doesn't have certain connectors on that market that limits its growth. But on the other end, as you mentioned, also the multicultural attitude towards problem solving is something that I strongly believe in and talk about often. And that is, you should not build a team with everyone from the same country, because then you will not have the same competitive edge, and you will have built something that is too hard aligned or designed towards a certain mindset. You need to have other types of ways of looking at it. Depending on where you come from, maybe certain color combinations can be wrong, or maybe different customer journeys might not be as efficient because we look at things in different ways, and there is always the history connected to everything. Like, we come from a historical background. We have this experience of life with us. For example, if you look at e-commerce, many of the sites are still using a shopping cart, but there is no one driving a shopping cart online.
Exactly. Yeah, I just came back from Boston. I was in MIT for my graduation ceremony after 1 year of study.
Congratulations, Juan.
So much. And one of the master classes that we had in our residential week was from Dr. Reza Rahman, and he's leading diversity and sustainability in MIT. And one of the things that he was saying is like, well, if you really want your company to be global, And today, if you're not global, you're gonna die, right?
Yeah.
Because the competition will eat you alive. You need to have a diverse cultural environment in your organization, and you have to have diverse teams. But it's not just the composition; it's the mentality of the organization that has to be at the heart of the entity. Thinking globally, thinking about working in different spaces and building a momentum and intentionally being intentional about being diverse, as you
Yeah.
said. And I think that's very important, right? It was interesting because we did an exercise where all of us, we were 180 executives. We all had to give our vote and say, are we biased or not, right? Are we? And most of us said we are biased, right? We recognize that we're biased. So, and if each one of us is biased, then and it's just something that is normal. After that, we were just doing a study, and so we said, yeah, everyone generally accepts the fact that we are biased, and we all think that's a bad thing, right? Therefore, let's be biased in different ways. So let's our bias complement each other. In that way, we are less biased as a group than we are alone.
But there is an interesting contradiction here, which I think is a fruitful way to dig a little deeper into this conversation about closed and open systems. Because we started the conversation, thanks to you, Karl, with your reflection on Sweden and how the constraints that existed in Sweden, whether climatic constraints, or institutional constraints, educational constraints, they actually drove innovation because it created an element of focus for people and created some of those blinders were actually necessary for innovation to flourish, because innovation doesn't flourish without failure, without pain. And it's I see it all over again the moment we open ourselves up and we accept diversity, we accept openness, so then there is the other side of it that at some point we need to incorporate as well, so that both operating in tandem, in a sense, like two wheels of a car, so, or like yin yang, or
Yeah.
the two sides of the coin. So I'm kind of, and especially seeing, the recent political developments in the U.S., with President Trump, coming in and bringing in a radically different approach, to politics, to economics, and reshuffling the traditional cultural understandings even within the U.S., aligning the same party, so kind of appeals, to both conservative Christians and Silicon Valley executives at the same time. Maybe closing some of the earlier diversity conversations with the anti-race politics and those things that kind of twisting the traditional liberal narrative a little bit and changing it and replacing it with a maybe a more nuanced, people might say, or other people will say the opposite, with more of a kind of heavy-handed suppression of certain ideas. It makes me think, that the world is kind of is like a pendulum. It doesn't go forward in a linear fashion from, say, a closed system to an open
Yeah.
system, to Europe with borders, to Europe without borders. It may at some point have that leap, but then, there is a resistance happening, and some of the old systems come back, and there is this new interest in interaction between the open and the new. Anything, well, any commentary on that? And does it resonate? Have you seen that happening in Europe?
Yeah, all the time. I think that everything in what you just said is totally accurate, that everything is moving in different loops in a way, because just as you said, like there is a restraint at some point and then it goes back a little bit and then it goes down and then it just keeps on going like this over and over again. And I think that is very close to an innovation cycle as well. Like you innovate, you think it's going to be easy, and then it turns out that it's more and more difficult, but then all of a sudden you get to a point where, oh, it's working. And then you have to go back because you have a backlog that you need to take care of, because you've been pushing for your innovation so hard. You've not been taking care of your code or whatever it is. So you need to refactor, and then you go down a bit, but then you go up even more. And then it's the same thing over and over again.
Exactly. Yeah,
That's
I completely agree. Yeah, I think that's a great way to say it. One of the key elements to think about is the human brain is constantly trying to innovate. It's like built for this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. If we weren't built, or DNA wasn't geared and built for innovation, we wouldn't achieve what we achieved.
Yeah.
Against all odds, living from nothing in a cave to suddenly, commanding spaceships in space. And all that kind of lack of comfort or constant ideation process that happen in your brain. So I think it just connects to what German was saying. We may go in one path first, and then when we got to that point, we are like, well, what did we miss, or what is that thing that we wanted was not completely achieved. It can be better, right? So let's go back and let's refine on the other direction, right? So it's constantly like a zigzag, and eventually, if you just project this over millennia, you see a straight line, or maybe like you say, a pendulum. But eventually, there's always growth in innovation for humanity, and we would always do it in these ways, in which is swaying from one side to the other, but eventually getting somewhere better than we were before.
Yeah, but there is also, it's a very interesting topic and something that I've been looking into as well. And that is the human body itself is quite lazy. It tries to take shortcuts. It loves sugar and so on because it's easier for the body to transform into energy and so on. And our brain is the part of the body that consumes most energy, yet the brain is designed to take shortcuts for us as well. So if we just take the example of you traveling between your home and your office every day, after a while, you stop seeing all the different things because your mind is taking the shortcut because it already recorded the color of the houses, the intersection, how it looks, and so on and so on. So it doesn't start to record it every time any longer. It just knows from its training data that this is how it looks. So it's consuming less and less energy to protect your mind and your energy consumption from overloading by taking these shortcuts. But all of a sudden, if a house were to be repainted in the same color, you would not notice. If it's painted from white to red, you would notice because it's such a big difference.
So, Karl, I
Yeah,
think we are getting to the last 5 minutes of the podcast, and I wanted to ask you, if you were to digest and summarize the concepts that we share in the podcast for my audience here in Riyadh and in the Middle East, if they were to think about what are the key 3 or 4 things that are happening in Sweden that are kind of the secret sauce for innovation, that if we were to have it in the Middle East, things could be developed much faster. Innovation can really take off. Will it be, remove the borders, just build better schools? What is your take in terms of the key secret sauce from the Nordics, from Sweden?
I would say one super important part is to not try to chase for success, rather chase experience and knowledge. Dare to fail because there is no such thing as failure. It's a learning curve. And as soon as you can change your attitude towards failure to be a learning curve and use that over and over again, you will see that you will get successful rather than looking at other people that are successful because they have actually managed to tame their inner devil in a way and not feel like the failure will hold them back, but rather propel them forward.
Yeah, that's a great thought. We should never forget about a failure. We should never forget about sacrificing success for knowledge, because again, that's the moment, when we cannot really create a shortcut to success.
Yeah.
So we really need to think long term because we need the success of the future. So the long term success rather than success of today.
Yeah.
So we need to again train our brain and a little bit wean it off of instant gratification and make it constantly think about the bigger gains. It's one of the best minds of Silicon Valley always talk about that you really need to be hyper focused, but on long-term goals.
Yeah.
And persevere, toward, those goals. This said, Juan, we have a great entrepreneur in front of us. We're in the middle of a podcast. Why don't we ask Karl, what's next in the podcast technology that Karl has been working on? So, and what awaits the world of podcast, in the near future? So, tell us a little bit about your ongoing project with the podcast technology.
Of course. So, I've been a guest on many podcast shows over the years, and I've been having my own podcast and so on also. And I realized that it's extremely time consuming. And as a podcaster, we don't want to do all this other stuff that needs to be done for the podcast to be successful. We want to record the show and have these beautiful conversations, and then the rest should just happen. But that's not the case.
Mhm.
You have to jump between different tools, upload, download files over and over again, create social media content, polish the recording, and so on. There's so many different steps. And if you look at this from a project manager point of view, there's between 20 and 200 steps, depending on how you want to build your show. So we started to build a SaaS product for that called Podmanager.ai. And with that, we try to automate as much as ever possible without removing the creativity from the human. Let's call it human in the loop, on top of us actually creating the recordings in this conversational style or whatever you as a podcaster prefer. But the intention is to not waste your time. And that's what Pod Manager AI is all about, to step in and do the heavy lifting where you don't feel you have the time, or where maybe AI can do it better for you.
Amazing.
Expect this on the market? Where can we stop using Riverside and switch to Pod Manager?
Just in a couple of weeks, and it's going to go out with a big bang. We have some tremendously interesting things that are coming, but go to podmanager.ai and just keep a look out there. I believe that any podcast will find this to be both extremely time efficient, but also extremely lower cost than what you're using today. But then also we have some extremely interesting AI capabilities that will make your show grow even further than what you can imagine today.
Exciting. Wow.
The Swedish innovation spirit, huh?
Of course.
Yes, yes, yes.
There is
We'll be the
nothing.
early adopters.
Let's
Yeah.
build it.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Karl. It's been an exciting journey through so many different topics today. And it was great to hear, your side of the story, some of your personal details, it was fantastic education for our listeners and viewers. So any last comments, Juan, Karl, anything we want to close it with?
I think that what I take home is, Sweden is a wonderful place for innovation. And the history helps a lot, but it's really about this relentless ideation and not conformism with the status quo.
Yeah.
And being able to break things and make it happen. And just never give back, never go back to this, to the previous status. Just whenever you learn something, apply it on the new company, put it in the market, and just make it happen.
Yeah.
So these are great things to take away and see if we can bring those things to the region where we are. Thank you so much, Karl, for your time. It has been an amazing session today.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Bye, everybody. See you in a
Bye.
couple of weeks at the Constant.
Thank you so much.